Started here in a few minutes, but now we're live. I thought that we were live before. My apologies. Hello, everyone, and welcome to a really important Facebook Live. If you're watching from LinkedIn or our YouTube, hello, or from our private Facebook group, the ASTA Member Lounge, go ahead and type in the comments section. Let us know where you're listening in from. We'd love to know. If you're an ASTA member, let us know what chapter you're a part of. And of course, this chat feature, the comment section, that's what we're going to be using for our Q&A with our special guests, who I'm going to introduce here in a moment. So as we're getting started, we're waiting for one panelist to get ready behind the scenes and join us. So as we're getting ready here, again, just let us know where you're listening in from, what city, state, country, what ASTA chapter you're a member of, and of course, the comment section below is where we're going to answer your questions. And we also want to know, do you have clients traveling to South Africa soon? Are you planning trips to South Africa? Are you a South African specialist? That is something that we want to know, because we're here to help with a very special panel of guests, and I'm going to go ahead and introduce them. First, we have Mark Meader, who is our Senior Vice President of Industry Affairs and Education. He is going to be moderating this session. We have Otto de Vries. He's the CEO of the Association of South African Travel Agencies, representing outbound travel. We have David Frost. He's the CEO of Southern African Tourism Services Association. That's representing inbound travel. We have Gillian Saunders. She's an independent tourism and hospitality advisor and chairperson of the board of the University of Johannesburg's School of Tourism and Hospitality. And then we have Collin Bell, who is the co-founder of Natural Selection, which is an African safari business. So before I bring everyone up, I just want to say again, please use the comment section. That's where we can answer your questions, okay? So if you have questions, use that feature. If we don't get to your question, we'll still be able to answer it later on the comment thread. You can always email us at pr@asta.org, and we'll make sure that your question gets to the appropriate panelists. And without further ado, I'm going to bring up my colleague, Mark Meader. Hi, Mark.
Hi, Erica. Thank you. Thank you so much.
You're
I just
welcome.
want to say welcome to our guests, our listeners in today. I know many of our travel agencies and advisors, especially in the US and elsewhere, are very anxious and interested in knowing more about travel to South Africa and Southern Africa in general. What do you need to know today, given all that's going on now with some of the many changes in terms of border closings and more as the Omicron variant takes place? So, as Erica mentioned, we have a great list of panelists who are joining us, all from South Africa, I'm pleased to say. So, Erica, if we can bring them into the picture now, I want to say welcome to all of you: Otto, Gillian, Collin, David. Thank you so much for being with us today and for talking to our ASTA members and others, our ASTA friends that are joining us today from both the United States and around the globe. As I mentioned, travel to South Africa. What do these travel agencies and advisors need to know? Many on the call today likely have customers who are currently booked to South Africa, perhaps some even in South Africa today, or who are contemplating travel to South Africa. And I think it's so timely in terms of hearing from you, in terms of your perspectives on what our advisors need to know, what consumers need to know in that regard. So I'd like to open it up by specifically asking a combination of Otto and David. Otto, you're quite focused on, correct me if I'm wrong, but outbound travel from South Africa. David, you're more so for inbound travel to South Africa. Give us an update regarding the latest travel restrictions in the market and what that impact is to South Africa. Otto, how about you first?
I'll happily kick it off. Good afternoon from South Africa. Good morning to all of you. It's fantastic to join you. Look, it's a moving target, and we find ourselves in an incredibly challenging situation. But at the same time, it's safe to say that we've never seen restrictions implemented on the freedom of travel for South Africans as quickly as we did when our government, the health department, made an announcement on Thursday regarding the new variant that we had identified. By Friday evening, pretty much 60 or 70 countries had basically closed their borders to us. It was frightening, it was rapid, it was quick. Our members were very actively involved then in trying to obviously identify how we were going to get our South African clients back home, how we were going to try to manage the impact of a lot of airlines reducing capacity in and out of the market. Ostensibly, whilst there is still flights operating, we've seen quite a substantial reduction, which has resulted in a lot of delays in terms of getting people home. And it's impacted our ability in terms of outbound travel and tourism at a very, very critical time, because unlike you guys in the Northern Hemisphere, here in the Southern Hemisphere, we're hitting our summer holidays. And December and January is a very, very high peak season for outbound leisure tourism. This is when we take our summer break. And we have been completely crippled by the decisions that have been made by these 60 or 70 odd governments in a very short window of time. And we really could ill afford this, considering how we lost last year's summer as well.
Right. Thank you, Otto. David, how about from the inbound perspective? What's your stance and take on the current state of play? David, I think you're muted. Sorry. Can you unmute?
Thanks. Good morning, to you guys, and from a sort of sunny afternoon in Johannesburg. The effect on inbound has been catastrophic. For much of this year, we were on the red list from the United Kingdom, which is our single biggest source market. The US is our second biggest source market, and thank goodness the US took a more pragmatic approach during the year, and we certainly saw some business coming back quite strongly from the US market. We got off the UK red list in October, and that had an amazing catalytic effect of boosting demand from the US as well. And we were looking at a really good high season forward book, business coming back. This is to an industry that's been shut down effectively for 18 months. So the effect of what Otto has depicted, this sort of knee-jerk domino decision by the UK and then the US and a whole lot of other key source markets, has been absolutely catastrophic for our industry. We surveyed our members, we got over 600 responses. In the first 48 hours, we lost 940 million rands worth of business. Gillian will come on later, and she can speak about that in terms of a longer term thing, but it goes into the billions of rand that we are looking at being wiped off our forward book. But when you have a look at the substance of this, Mark, I mean, and you look at the way this has happened, that this variant is now present in many countries around the world. It's at a community transmission level in many of those countries. It was detected in Holland 2 weeks before it was detected in South Africa. And having world-class scientists who do the work and share this as is right and proper with the world, and then to be punished in this particularly pernicious and colonial way, is absolutely unacceptable. Because what has happened subsequent to this is, as I say, it's been discovered in all these other countries with no travel links to South Africa. But the US and the UK has not banned travel from Holland or Belgium or any of the European countries, but it has in the last 3 days banned travel from Nigeria. And this type of approach, this type of pernicious and unscientific approach, where there are august bodies in the world, like the World Health Organization, that speak out on this, that say travel bans are absolutely ineffective. Willie Walsh from IATA coming out unequivocally. I mean, we even had the Archbishop of Canterbury 2 days ago speaking out about how morally iniquitous this is. But what we need to do is we need to mount a lobbying campaign that bans travel bans, because they are not the way of the future. And let me just say on a personal level, and I'll finish here. So we've had this sort of fourth wave in South Africa, which has been driven to an extent by the Omicron variant. I was diagnosed as being positive 2 weeks ago. I had the Omicron variant, and I went and sequenced it particularly. I coughed 3 times and I blew my nose 3 times, and that was my COVID. I'm double jabbed with Pfizer, and if this is the end game, bring it on, because what we need to do is to get beyond this. And I think a lot of the scaremongering about the transmissibility of this variant is because people don't know they've got it, because it's totally mild. Our CEO of our biggest private sector healthcare provider in South Africa, Richard Friedland of Netcare, has said in his opinion, and this is on the record, this is the end game. This is exactly what happened in 1918 with the flu epidemic. It became transmissible and mild, and they didn't have vaccines back in 1918. So that's in a nutshell where we are.
Thank you, David. And we're happy to know that you are feeling and doing fine. You certainly seem well today. So as much as we are sorry that you've contracted the dreaded COVID, happy to know that you're well, and also happy to know that it appears that for you at least Omicron has not been that significant. I think you'll also be pleased from an ASTA perspective. We certainly agree that from what our country and others should be doing is really focused on the current planning in place today, which indicates that it should be all about vaccinations. It should be about testing, all in place today, and frankly, that should be enough rather than to have to close borders in addition to that, or frankly, even quarantine when not needed. So much appreciated there. I know that Otto, South Africa has a number of stances in place or situations in place similar to testing and COVID masking, et cetera. You and I talked about a fairly lengthy list of all the pieces in place today that help to ensure that the spread of the virus is mitigated and held to a minimum. But can you just because I want to move on to Gillian and Collin, but just real quickly, Otto, what are some of those pieces in place today that our people should be aware of?
Sure. Look, I think, Mark, the one thing that we've been very good at and very consistent about is we've operated under COVID with what we call a state of emergency. It's not a great word, but there you have it. Governments are not necessarily good at creating labels, but what it did was provide them with a certain level of control around making quick and rapid decisions to help mitigate and manage the outbreak of the virus. So we've been living with this since March of 2020. Now, that shifts from time to time in terms of what level we find ourselves on. And that is driven by scientific evidence that relates specifically to the number of new cases, potentially deaths, et cetera, et cetera. The bottom line is that regardless of what level we have found ourselves on, we have had a couple of very, very important standards in place that we have continued to apply. So for South Africa, you cannot move around in public without wearing a mask. That's been in place since March of 2020.
Indoors or outdoors, correct?
Indoors and outdoors. Yeah. As long as you're in a public space, you are required to wear a mask. You enter any building, whether it's a workplace, whether it is a restaurant, a hotel, an airport, it doesn't matter. There is temperature testing. There is sanitation that is provided at every single entry point. And you are required, there will be a staff member standing at the door ensuring that you are sanitizing. And lastly, there's track and trace. So you cannot go into a restaurant, you cannot enter a hotel or any other public space without putting down certain personal details so that we can track and trace you. I would suggest that South Africa is probably the safest place to be right now. This is where you want to be. And, we have an incredible health program and a very, very professional health system in place. So, there shouldn't need to be any levels of fear about traveling here. And to David's point, 3 weeks in, we are seeing very clear evidence that whilst it's highly transmissible, what we're not seeing is high levels of hospitalization or any need for additional hospitalization, including oxygen or ICUs. In fact, most cases are being discovered as a sideline because of another reason, because guess what? You get admitted to a hospital in South Africa, one of the first things they do is test you for COVID. And they found out by accident that you're COVID positive. So, I think it's very important to give comfort to your traveling passengers that South Africa has and will continue to provide a very safe environment, including a set of health protocols and standards that have been adopted by the industry and recognized by the World Travel and Tourism Council as one of the best and one of the finest models of how one should be managing this to, again, provide that comfort to travelers.
Otto, we have a question from one of our people joining. Is there still a curfew in play?
There is a curfew in play, and you guys can correct me because it's a moving target, but I believe it's something like 11 p.m. until 5 or 6 in the morning, or 4 in the morning. So it's kind of insignificant, really.
Right. And only meant to be helpful, too. What are you doing
Correct.
up after 11 p.m., right?
100%.
As my mother would say to me. Very good. Thank you, Otto. Can Erica, can we bring in Collin and Gillian? I'd like to get a kind of unique perspective from both of them. Gillian, I know that as a consultant to the industry, you're likely to have great opinions on all of this, especially in terms of what travel advisors need to know. Collin, same from you. I believe you are more in the supplier realm, given your experience and current background, et cetera. What do travel agencies need to know for travelers who have either booked for a future trip or are contemplating doing such? Gillian, can we start?
Maybe I can answer that best from my side. So Collin Bell, I've just come back from hosting a group of Americans around South Africa and Botswana. And I must say, thank goodness for Americans. All you need to do to arrive in South Africa is you've got to have a valid PCR test. And the same with Botswana, it's got to be valid for 72 hours before you arrive and in that time period. And to have Americans around the dinner table on safari was the most fantastic thing. To hear your accents after such a long absence. And thank goodness for United Airlines. They've been consistent. They're flying all the way from New York into Joburg. It was a complete and absolute pleasure. And remember, most of our activities are outdoors. So we had this extraordinary safari from my side, just to hear you guys and listening around the dinner table and having you on the safari, and also to be with you to witness the awe of Africa. And I think everybody had sort of hadn't had their Africa fix for so long. This particular group, they've been desperately trying to come for so long. And to see Africa through their eyes was just such a privilege. And as David said, we've had such a good order book filled with the UKs and all the rest of it. And the UK's just disappeared. But the Americans are still traveling. You're still welcome. It's easy to travel. It's no big deal. And on top of it, I mean, the exchange rate is something like, 16 to 1. I mean, the cost of a beer is kind of like a tip to a parking attendant in America. So it was great value. Everybody went back just stoked at what we can offer in this neck of the woods. So, yeah, thank goodness for America. Thank you.
Thank you, Collin. Gillian, how about from your perspective?
Yeah, Mark, well, good morning, everybody, and good afternoon from South Africa. Look, I'm an analyst and an advisor to the tourism industry, and what I've been doing for the last few months is also working with the scientists on the science. So I'm not sure, before the guy from America gets on the plane and gets here, when you guys are interfacing with them, I would assume that there's some concerns over the pandemic levels in South Africa, possibly, obviously, of the Omicron virus variant as well. So maybe to say, and I'm reinforcing a bit of what Otto has said and a bit of what David has said, is it's a little bit early days, but there is some solid data coming out to show that Omicron actually may not confer severe illness and death, and also that the vaccines probably work. So I'll just take you through some things. No doubt, and if you look at the numbers, South Africa's in a strong and growing and fast-growing fourth wave. But let's just put that into context. It's still at lower case levels than the USA on a per head of population, per 100,000 of population. And maybe that's always worth remembering. We're about 2/3 of the level of the USA cases at the moment. And for what it's worth, some of those other countries are way ahead of us on average number of daily new cases. And it's led by one province, Gauteng. And I don't like to say this because I absolutely adore Gauteng, and it's a great place to be. But most of your tourists are probably not spending a long time in Gauteng. They're going to the other places, the bush, the Western Cape, places where, at the moment at least, the pandemic is in lower levels, but it is growing. But maybe the most important thing to say is the data is definitely showing that this disease looks like it's mild. So to give you 2 or 3 stats, in terms of our current active cases, the number of people in hospital at the moment is about 3% of the active cases. Whereas at the same point in our third wave, it was more like 17% of people were in hospital. And then if you look at the people in ICU at the moment, ICU as a percentage admitted is just over 6%, whereas previously it was nearly 25%. So the data from the hospitals is looking very positive to say this thing actually isn't severe. Hospital admissions as well. 87% of admissions were unvaccinated in South Africa. It's a small sample at the moment. This was actually Tshwane, where the epicenter of the disease or the Omicron wave first started, and about 84% of the current patients are unvaccinated. So the vaccinated are making up a very small percentage, and that's when South Africa has a relatively low level of vaccination. So preliminary data is showing us that this is not severe and that the vaccines work. But again, Otto talked about this, and I'll just say a couple of more detailed things, and we'll get more data soon. One of our biggest hospital groups, sorry, David mentioned this, the CEO put some stats out the other day. Of all their COVID admissions, or people in hospital with COVID, we should put it that way, 90% were not admitted to hospital because of COVID. They were going to hospital for something else. 90% were going to hospital for something else, but ended up being tested as a routine admission policy and were found to have COVID. And therefore, similarly, at least about 90% are not on oxygen, never mind not in ICU. So those hospitalization rates that I told you are already low are actually a whole bunch of people, many of whom weren't actually assume, they have no COVID symptoms. They would never have known they had COVID, apart from the fact they had to go to hospital for something else. So I think this sort of data is being added to as we talk, and I would assume that we can keep updating it for the industry. I certainly do an update on this once a week at the moment for our groups that work in the industry. And it's really looking, maybe I'm a cup half full person, but it's really looking quite good. Even the data for Gauteng, the province which is going up the fourth wave, the strongest, is starting to tail off. 7 days ago, the average growth in cases was 33-point-something%. Today, or yesterday, it was only 9.5%. So we seem to be showing the first signs of a bit of a slowdown in the growth. So overall, if you had to put any sort of science in front of your clients to say, don't worry about Omicron, I know you can't say don't worry, but you can say preliminary indications are that actually, sorry, I've got dogs who like to contribute to everything I do. But it's really sort of, the scientists are a little bit reluctant to put their names to this data yet because it is early. But many, many commentators on an ad hoc basis and with the information are saying it's not going to be a severe illness and the vaccines are probably going to work. Just the last thing, you probably hear that there was what we call test tube neutralization assays were happening over the last few weeks, and they were announced yesterday, the beginnings of these. And they all showed that Omicron has what they call immune breakthroughs. Your immunity from prior infections or from vaccine is not as good against Omicron as the first virus of the first waves or as against the Delta virus. That doesn't mean to say two things, that it's so bad that they're not effective. And the jury's out on that. There was a wide range of results from those tests. They certainly did show that a third booster would be even more effective. And with a third booster dose, you were probably very well protected from Omicron. But what all of those don't say, and usually the scientists never tell you when they talk about the immune breakthroughs, is none of these types of tests in the laboratory tell you whether it works for severe illness and death. It just tells you might get an infection. But if the infections are always going to be mild because you're vaccinated or mild because the virus doesn't confer a severe disease, that is something we don't know until we've had more data through surveillance. So these early results that look a bit scary because they say, yeah, it's got immune breakthrough, the vaccines aren't working as well, are not the end of the story. It's the beginning of the story, and there's a lot more data to come. So that doesn't mean that you won't have effectiveness from vaccines against severe disease and death, and most likely you do. And lastly, and I'm sorry to just harp on about the science, those types of immune tests that they do in the laboratory is sort of almost like one half of your immune system. There's something else in your immune system called your T cells and your T cell memories. That isn't tested in the same way, and that also can help mean that you have a very mild infection should you have what's called a breakthrough infection. So Yeah.
Thank you, Gillian. Thank you so much. Very insightful and helpful information and data. I think that's good for all of us to know. I'd like to turn the tides a little bit and dig into some of what for lack of a better term, I would call the logistics of the situation. And in fact, some of these comments or questions I have for all of you are coming up even in our own questions coming through the comments section. And by the way, listeners, please, if you have questions for the panel, please add them to the comments bar, and we'll do our best to get to them before the end of the call. Priscilla Holmes in particular is asking a question that's on my mind too. A lot, and Gillian, you did a good job of explaining why there may be not too much of a reason to worry ultimately about Omicron in terms of its negative impact. David, you mentioned that you had it yourself and you did not get that sick. I think a lot of travelers, and of course there are travel agencies that are booking them, are very worried about what do you do if you do test positive, because you're going to have to be tested before you can come home to the United States. If you test positive and perhaps you're asymptomatic, you're still going to have to quarantine. You can't go home right away at the end of your trip. What happens then? Where do you stay? What do you do? What's the cost to doing that? I'm sensing that in many ways that may be more of a concern to people than actually contracting the virus, at least to some extent. Well, any comments from any of you on this topic?
Can I jump in there, Mark? For me, if I was living in America right now, I would make sure that I'm fully vaxxed and I've got a booster. Then the chance of the data is showing that the chance of you getting any of these variants is almost zero. Then once you're here, as Otto explained, we're very, very strict in public places. But once you're in the bush and you're in all these outdoor areas, the chances of getting COVID in the outdoors is negligible. So long as the folks are well vaccinated beforehand, they've done all the stuff, and then when they come through, in the public areas, they use their masks, then the chances are in their favor. On the converse, all of us, so then the other question is, how do you get the PCRs in the camps and all the rest of it? The safari camps and the countries are so organized to make sure that people can get PCR tests in their places where they're staying on holiday. You don't have to make a journey to any place. The PCR comes to you, and it's generally done the day before you leave South Africa going back again. So you've got a valid PCR within that 72 hours. And then the final thing, if you do get it, all of us have got contingencies, relatively inexpensive contingencies for places to stay where you can walk around and you're so isolated, but you've got really good places where you're not going to be stuck in a tiny little hotel room wondering what's next. So we've all the different companies have made these different plans to make sure that people can travel to the destination comfortably, safely, and also we got the backup plans to make sure that if something happens, that we can accommodate people. And it hasn't happened yet in our instance. We've got all these little contingencies and we haven't had to use them.
I think that's very helpful, Collin. Thank you. I think there's additional concern with the availability of testing, especially given the need to turn that test result around now within 24 hours. Plus, any comments on the cost of that test, specifically in South Africa? I'm assuming that if it's provided by a private source, it could be expensive. Is that true or not?
Well, generally, the cost of a PCR test in South Africa is around about, on a private basis, is around about 850 Rand. So what's that? $50. And then if you're in the middle of nowhere, then the cost of getting the person to you in your safari camp or wherever. If you're in a city, it's no big deal. People are there already. So it's a very negligible cost to get the PCR test. If you're further and away in places like the Okavango Delta, there's a system, how's this, that you can be in the most remote area. And for $290, a helicopter will be flown in the day before. You'll be PCR tested, and when you come to Maun Airport, you're given the certificate. So at all different levels, doesn't matter how remote you are. The one thing about the private sector down this part of Africa, it works. We make a plan, we know there's issues, we make a plan, and things happen. And I had this on my own trip. Everybody is completely flabbergasted that we said at 9 o'clock in the morning, just when we've come back from our last game drive on that particular day, the helicopters will be there. And sure enough, 10 to 9, they landed. 9 o'clock, everybody is getting their PCRs. 10 past 9, they were gone. And next morning, as we arrived in Maun, there were the stuff. Everything works, and if we didn't have that, our businesses would be gone. So
Right.
I think every company is doing their absolute utmost to make sure that guests are not inconvenienced. As I said earlier,
I have to add to that, Colin. Your comment about just travel in South Africa in general. Though 3 or 4 times I've been to South Africa, I don't think I spent any time indoors, whether on the garden route in Cape Town, in Kruger, on safari. It's an outdoor country, and frankly, there are not a lot of people around. I'd be more worried about being attacked by a hippo than contracting COVID, I think. So it's a good point. But nevertheless, I do think that there are concerns or fears about, and I think it's reassuring for our audience to hear that the ability to get tested and results back quickly and affordably is very helpful too. I know we're gonna run.
Sorry, there's a question here. If we test in South Africa and then enter Zambia, Zimbabwe, Botswana within 72 hours, absolutely, one certificate is valid all the time, so long as it's within 72 hours. So we're making it easy.
Very good, very good, very good. I know we're going to run out of time shortly, but I do want to ask all of you, our panelists, what can our travel agencies and advisors here do in support of travel to South Africa? How can travel advisors help today? David, what's your thought on that?
Well, I think it's incumbent on us as the travel industry and wherever we find ourselves to really start rallying together and to put an advocacy program forward that actually speaks to the the folly of these knee-jerk travel bans. They do irreparable harm. I mean, the cost that this is doing, I mean, we give you financial figures, but the effects on the livelihoods of people who are dependent on the tourism industry. It's the second biggest sector of our economy in South Africa. And as Collin very eloquently says, 1 in 7 South Africans puts food on their table every night because of the tourism industry. If that stops, that is a major impact on people's lives in a country that can sorely need it. And then what we have, and it's our key USP, is our wildlife, Mark. And that base and that conservation base that's been built up over a century, that's not something you switch on and off. And the lack of revenue into some of our precious conservation areas is starting to really get to a tipping point where this can severely undermine this precious resource that we have in our part of the world. So through ASTA and through your lobbying efforts, if you can speak to your lawmakers and to your politicians to follow the science and to follow the logic and to heed the advice of bodies like the WHO and IATA, and not to go to sort of knee-jerk reactions, to push back against, I mean, the concerns your Texas governor had that South Africans were going to come across the border. I mean, it's all, it's folly, and I think we need to look at a new tomorrow for travel. And I think travel has a vital part to play in the world going forward, and we should not shy away from it. We should embrace it. This is what bonds us as human beings and holds us together.
Thank you, David. Very, very choice words, and we appreciate that. You'll be pleased to know that ASTA is very supportive of doing just what you suggest and reopening borders. Collin.
So, Mark, I see your question about the tourism industry in the States and all the rest of it. My advice right now, if you're a travel advisor in the States, is to make sure that when you book, you have a good DMC, destination management company here locally, also in your chain. And the commission structure allows for all the different levels to be there. And if you've got somebody on the ground here who's competent and who's vested with you to make sure your guests have a good time, they are here to make sure that any little ruffles get smoothed out. And 99% of the time, those ruffles are smoothed out without even the guest knowing that there's an issue. If you're trying to do things from long haul, it's a bit more difficult. But if you've got a really good DMC here in South Africa, and there's dozens of them, they're all around the country, and those DMCs are then your eyes and ears, and they're your guarantee to make sure that your Mrs. Schwartz, who's traveling to us, is going to have a great time. So I think try and use the travel channel, which is here, to be your support over there. It doesn't change your commission structures. It makes sure that the guest, at the end of the day, goes back happy.
Very good. Thank you.
Like I just say on that point, Mark, a little. SATSA represents over 500 DMCs. You know, go to the SATSA website. You'll find them all credible, all vetted.
Excellent. Thank you. I'd like to, we're going to need to close out our session. Unfortunately, we're running out of time. But before we do that, I would like to offer each of you 30 seconds. Any final closing remarks? 30 seconds. We're going to need to keep it short, but 30 seconds. And Gillian, can we start with you?
Okay, thanks very much, Mark. Very quickly, I think I support everything that my colleagues have said. We are the most amazing destination. Really, I'm originally English, so I get what the other side looks like. This is the best destination in the world, has the most variety, and it's outdoors, and the climate is wonderful. So please advise your clients to come here. And when David said all of that about conservation, about livelihoods, it almost feels, and I don't like using this terminology, but to me, what the UK did and what other countries then followed suit is like a crime against humanity. The humanity of the African continent and the conservation and the fauna and flora of this continent, which we're preserving for the entire world, not just for us, is at risk because of these knee-jerk reactions. So if your clients, as well as you guys talking to your authorities, please ask your clients to also support us, because we need it. And it's really not nice what is happening to our people. It makes me almost cry, the number of people, we were having people giving jobs back because the order books were looking full, and now people have lost their job again. It is heartbreaking. So please, if your clients can also support us from that perspective, we need the tourism. It's incredibly important to our continent.
Thank you, Gillian. Very, very heartfelt and appreciated. Colin, how about you? Any last?
I'm just looking at and I see that Tina's got 300 people traveling to South Africa. Yeah. Tina, that's fantastic. Send them. Don't worry. Make sure you got a DMC. We'll look after them.
We're getting lots of fantastic comments from our people listening in about the beauty of South Africa and the desire to send people there, go there, etc. And I'm glad to also see that indeed many people have either booked or planning to go. David, how about from you? A few parting words for our audience.
Yeah, look, I mean, guys, this time will pass, but it's incumbent of us to keep the focus and keep the faith. And I just want to say thank you to you, Mark, and to ASTA for this webinar and for the amazing support that your members have given South Africa over the years. And keep it coming, guys. I think we are arguably one of the best COVID destinations in the world. We are low impact tourism. You know, we get before COVID, we only got 2.6 million international arrivals. You know, Turkey gets 56 million, Thailand gets 32. It's wide open spaces. As you said, it's sunshine, and we are perfectly suited. We've had domestic tourism open since July last year, and nobody gets COVID going on holiday in South Africa.
Right. Thank you, David. Thank you. Otto, I have two questions for you. One is from our audience, and I'm going to turn it to you first, and then I want any parting comments from you for our audience as well. Tina Ulm is asking, do you think that South Africa will implement an only vaccinated passengers will be allowed in at any point? That's not the case today, correct me if I'm wrong, but can you predict whether or not that might happen? Any indicator there?
Look, I've learned a long time ago to not get involved in crystal ball gazing. What I can tell you is that South Africa as a country and as a government are investigating whether we, as a nation, need to shift to mandatory vaccination. Now, that's our process and that's our work. Whether that happens or not, and I think as a travel and tourism industry, we strongly support that. I think the intent is to ensure that customers feel safe when they travel to Southern Africa, and that they feel that when they are engaging with people through the value chain, whether it is at a check-in counter, whether it's collecting the rental car, whether it's checking into a hotel, etc., restaurants, that they feel that people that are serving them are vaccinated. We've been hearing those questions come up again and again and again. Can you ensure that I will be served or taken care of by someone who's been vaccinated. So from an industry perspective, it's something that we feel that we can strongly support. I do not, however, believe that it will be a motivation for this government to say, let's enforce the requirements of vaccinated travelers to South Africa. And I'm quite sure that Gillian can touch on the data a little bit further in a moment. So from my point of view, I can't see that happening, but I'm encouraged with where the conversation is going within South Africa around mandatory vaccination.
Thank you, Otto.
Just to perhaps add that I think it's a very tricky minefield. When we talk about mandatory vaccines in South Africa, we're not talking about making it compulsory, but we're talking about making it mandatory in certain activities and settings. And I think that is possibly the issue. We'll let you get off the plane unvaccinated, but the regulations that come in, I think, may be starting or may look at making it mandatory to go to certain settings. And we need to, as a tourism industry, think hard about that and lobby for the right approach in terms of where it's required that you have a vaccine. The first place they seem to be talking about is the workplace. So I'm not sure if it's going to stop there. It's a little bit early, and they can't do it yet because we are 70% we are 65% unvaccinated. So they have to give a window or a time frame to any mandatory things they bring in. So it's a moving target. As Otto says, you can't actually predict and you don't like to forecast. So we have to wait and see. But we hear your point. We need to think about it.
Good point. And I want to make one on the testing front. If I can just make one point, when people re-enter to the U.S., whether from South Africa or anywhere else, the U.S. does accept rapid testing, both rapid PCR tests, which is indeed very fast, a little bit more expensive than the antigen, I believe, but both the rapid tests are acceptable here too. So it can help from a time savings, if not cost savings perspective. So Otto, any final words other than what you just said?
Yeah, thanks, Mark. I think in closing, all I'd like to say is number one, thank you for your continued support, and also to all of those that are on this webinar today. Thank you for your continued support to the destination. All that I hope is that we've been able to provide you with nuggets of information that will give you confidence to continue to sell and promote South Africa as a destination, that you in turn are able to give peace of mind to your customers, particularly those that have already booked and who can see that there might be some challenges in the short term. Feel confident, know that you are supported. There are a team of very, very effective and efficient people across the whole of Southern Africa who will look after your customers, give them a great experience, will protect them, and will endeavor to make sure that they will go home as ambassadors for Africa and Southern Africa. And thank you for this opportunity to share these thoughts with you all.
Thank you, Otto. I just have to say thank you so much to all of you, Otto, David, Gillian, and Collin. Your insights today have been tremendous. I have certainly personally learned so much from the discussion. I wish we had more time. I know that just from the comments that our attendees have made, that they too have learned a lot and are very appreciative. We may be calling on you, Otto, David, Gillian, and Collin, to participate with us again in some form as we continue to communicate with our members and at large and more. But with that, I want to say again, thank you all. Thank you to those listening today. We hope it will be has been valuable to you. And of course, this session has been recorded and will be available on ASTA's Facebook page, as well as on our YouTube channel, on LinkedIn, etc. So again, thank you all. Erica, I will turn it back over to you. Unless if you have any parting comments you want to make. Erica.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you, everyone. This has been a really valuable discussion. And as Mark said, this recording is going to be available. You can visit it on our Facebook page, YouTube, LinkedIn, revisit it as many times as you'd like. I will encourage our panelists, if they're able to hop on the comments threads and answer any questions that we didn't answer, or to clarify them. And if you would like to email us questions, pr@asta.org, we will try our best to forward those questions to the appropriate panelist. And thank you again for being a part of this discussion. We really appreciate your time and attention, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Erica. Thanks, everyone.